The Ghoul in Fallout is not at all like Lucy or Maximus. Those are the gems of the show. The reason why the show is so interesting and worth considering as philosophy, because those are radical figures. They cling with naivete to their fantasies, being in the power armor, being someone who can hold her father to justice, okie dokie. Like that naivete literally is what changes this impossible to change world around them, the post-apocalyptic landscape. But the Ghoul is someone who fights tooth and nail to keep things the same, but he does so with inconsistencies. He does struggle, so he's not utterly conservative, but he's a very inconsistently conservative figure, basically. And what he gets to is what's boring and static about the cowboy itself, the Western genre, which is a genre of nostalgia, trying to keep things the way they are so you can have this bifurcated relationship between the frontier and society, where you can go off in this infinite cartoon play of violence and exposure to bodily risk, but not exposure to who you actually are, not exposure to change. That's what Lucy and Maximus actually do. And this is extremely evident in what we get with the season 2 finale, where, surprise, cryopod's empty, your family is in another castle, vault. That's a complete relief to the Ghoul, and to us as viewers, to not actually get his family. It would be far more traumatic and undoing for him to have to confront his family than it is for him to keep things the same and go off on another adventure, to go off to Colorado. And that's what we want as viewers too. We want him to go off on another adventure. We don't want to see him become a family man and, start a Brahmin cattle ranch or whatever. We want him to stay exposed to this cowboy violence. And so this is not a proper love relation we're getting with the Ghoul and his family. A real love relation changes who you are, but a courtly loved one keeps yourself the same in this relation where there's an impediment between you and your love object, and you're putting that impediment there yourself, so that you can fall in love with this idea of the person and not be exposed to their desire. You're keeping their desire in you, their love for you, at bay, so you don't have to change. You don't have to deal with it. You can just deal with the fantasy version of it. And courtly love is a real thing with Westerns. 3:10 to Yuma, it gets hailed as a radical Western, but it's really not. I'll do a video on it later, but what we're getting with that villain, with his enigmatic Bushido of giving up his gang lifestyle and submitting himself to being in prison, that's all built on courtly love. That's all built on this needing an impediment so that you're falling in love with an idea and not exposed to actually changing yourself. I haven't read too far into it, but Lonely Dove is full of courtly love. There's one woman of ill repute in town, and everyone wants this courtly love relationship with her. And also there's huge nostalgia in that book too. That's just feels a little gross to me, but it's a thing with the Western, right? And this staticness with the girl is super apparent with his relationship with Lucy. In season 1, he's interesting because he's playing Virgil to Lucy and introducing her to the post-apocalyptic wasteland where he's willing to harm his friend and cannibalize people and whatnot. And what's interesting there is the ways in which Lucy does change to, let's just say, adapt. But in season 2, we get their relation, which is a little bit of a shock, like a little bit of an improper match, but it's what we as viewers most want, right? We want them to be partners together. But it's a relationship built on betrayal. The first episode sets a scene by borrowing from Good, Bad, and the Ugly, where you give over your friend for the bounty and free him before he's going to be executed. And then the fallout twist on that is to have a big guns blazing fight with the Great Khans. That is actually really telling because Good, Bad, and the Ugly is a very static film. The betrayal with that relation between the good and the ugly working together doesn't really go anywhere. And that's the purpose of the betrayal here between Lucy and the Ghoul. It's to keep things static, basically. Betrayal can be a radical thing where you're realizing the truth of your position, you're betraying your loved one kind of a thing, but this isn't betrayal in love. This is just kind of play fighting. This is setting the scene for infinite biting at each other kind of stuff. And so this gets into somewhat interesting territory where we get the addition of the Legion and the Rad Scorpion, and Lucy betrays the Ghoul, but knowing that he'll be okay, and then they split up and Lucy goes to the Legion and realizes, oh, the Legion's actually pretty terrible, and the Ghoul saves her. So there's, a bit of movement forward there. But the actually interesting betrayal is where we finally do get to Hank through his ersatz emissary, so we haven't gotten there yet. And the Ghoul makes the move to betray Lucy in order to keep his family safe, but it's really, again, to keep this static relation with his family, to keep himself the same, to not expose himself to the radical change of still pursuing his family, even though they're at risk, he's at risk. Lucy's already lost. She's drugged and going to be captured, but she knocks him out of the window and impales him. And that's how she clings to justice. That's how she supersedes the undone reality around her, by holding tight to that ideal. That's Freudian death drive right there. The ways in which we access infinity and supersede the world around us, exceed our own limitations. The Ghoul's version of that is a less than life. He's slime, basically. But Lucy's righteous punishment does get the Ghoul to correct things. He's the reason that Maximus gets to be the hero and is there to reunite with Lucy at the end. So, he's a vanishing mediator to uniting them, and also uniting Lucy with her father. He saves her and enables Lucy to actually properly confront her father at the end. So, the Ghoul's a necessary vanishing mediator there, but he only wants to, stay static with this I'm going after my family thing. I think all of this investment with the pre-war backstory in just season 2 is just another version of keeping things static. The soldier who's in a fog of war and doesn't know who his enemies are. Are we switching out Vault-Tec enemies for Enclave enemies, and what does that mean? That can lead into something, but for season 2, it's just an undulation over how the Ghoul keeps things the way they are. So he's a real foil. As much as we like to enjoy his hyper-violence, he's there to show us how it's boring, how it's not the interesting radicality of Maximus and Lucy, how their hunky-doriness or Maximus's idiocy in clinging to their fantasy is far more interesting, far more structurally, needing to get to. We as people need to get to their position, not the Ghouls. And that's a beautiful thing about the show. I have one more idea for a video on Robert House, but otherwise, that's been Fallout.